Hey, somebody needs to translate the stats. You have? Excellent. Good morning, afternoon, or evening. You are listening to the Professional Noticer. Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Andrews. Hey, thank you for making me a part of your week. My purpose here today and with every show we do is to play the part of a best friend or a coach. I want to help you live the life of your wildest dreams by giving you access to the greatest mentors the world has to offer today. This week, the Professional Noticer is sponsored by WisdomHarbor.com, the streaming service that connects parents and children, teachers with students, and business people with each other. Today, people all over America are finding WisdomHarbor.com's one-of-a-kind streaming service to be the perfect low-cost, high-quality investment in their family's life. For less than $3 a month per teacher, classrooms have access to original content only found on WisdomHarbor.com that teaches, entertains, and builds character in young people. You'll find it a huge relationship connector at home and work as well. And finally, you'll have something to talk about with your teenager other than how was school today. Utilizing video, audio, and the written word, content is delivered in small bites by Grammy winners, CEOs, comedians, chefs, best-selling authors, and Hall of Fame speakers. There are even guitar lessons from an award-winning songwriter. Check it out today and join your friends and neighbors who are already a part of WisdomHarbor.com. Observations and answers, that's what we do here on the Professional Noticer. And as you know, if you're a regular viewer, a regular listener, we love it when somebody comes to the table with both. When you get somebody that has observations and answers, it's a gold mine. And that's what we have today. We have a very special guest. And, you know, I love people like this, that their name, you go, yeah, I recognize that name. Where did I know that name from? And then you start listing the things they've done, and you know everything that they have done. And that's what we have here today. He's the author of The Power of Who, the author of Two Chairs, president and CEO of Eastman and Beaudine, one of the nation's leading executive search firms in business, professional, college sports, and entertainment. And this is just going to be fascinating. Please welcome Bob Beaudine. Hey, how are you doing,
how are
buddy?
you? Man, it's just great to be with you. Huge fan of yours, read all your books. Kind of, it's really funny is, I've always told people I never knew, people always think people who write books are trying to schmooze you into reading their books so they could get, so the writer's getting rich. And then they read all their, I read all their books and I found out they were already rich.
Right.
They were going to give us their two thoughts that could change the entire trajectory of your life. And I'll tell you, you got to be really proud of that because you've changed a lot of people's trajectory.
Well, thank you, buddy. Thank you. And if it's relationships and people, I am rich, you know? So I look at you, and in the same way, you are a very wealthy man. You have been helping people for a long, long, long time, and you're still in the news. I mean, I was reading, I mean, you just placed Dion out west, right? I mean, in Colorado.
I mean, could you put a person in bigger and make a bigger splash than what he's done? And he came to me like 7 years ago, kind of saying, hey, how do I get into the coaching world? And we spent like, 3/4 of a day talking to him about it. And you'd be just so proud of him. He's such a quality human being, such a great Christian guy. And he had really good thoughts. Of course, he's a champion at heart, so he knows all that. But to come into a team that's 1-11 and then all of a sudden know that he's going to be able to turn this around, which he is going to do. I mean, he's got 40,000 people coming to his first spring practice, which people are paying to go to. And it's the only one on ESPN. So that tells you a little bit about the fact if you have 40 million people on social media that follow you every day like they do Dion, he understands the platform he has. And his is similar to their athletic director. It's about kids and about their welfare, and it's about making a difference in their lives. And you can't be fake there. People know that as a coach and as a mom and a dad.
That's exactly right. I used to look at. I grew up in Alabama, and I used to watch Bear Bryant's Sunday afternoon shows, and I thought, wow, how great a connector is he? Because he would talk about somebody, and he would always bring in their mom and their dad, and
Right.
and say, man, that's you can always count on Stedman because he was raised by a good mom and daddy, and
Yeah.
I've met them down in Dothan, Alabama. You're just not going to find it. And man, his mama makes great banana pudding too. And I'm thinking, who wouldn't want to send their kid to a coach who tells the kid how great the parents are?
Well, now you're hitting on all these aspects, which tie totally in my business in executive search, because you're trying to find people who really are they're not trying to be interesting, they're trying to be interested. And so they walk into a home visit. They know more about everybody in there, the mom, the dad, the grandma, the grandpa. They know the uncle, the girlfriend. They know it all about that. And they're coming in specifically with a plan, right? And so people don't do that sometimes in interviews because they're trying so much to sell their what instead of actually building the relationship of the who. And so it just once people grasp that this has always been about people, that people matter most. Our heart knows it. God taught us. But I can tell you, sure, during this pandemic, we forgot all that, right?
Right. Right.
It's been a real backwards move. And so we got to get back to good blocking and tackling.
Bob, you and I have a couple of books that I think kind of parallel each other with the butterfly effect and the power of who. Have you noticed that?
100%. I mean, so I came up I tried to create a book there that, having done an executive search is that you already really know everyone you need to know. So you're not 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, you're one. And
Right.
So the hard part about life is when people are going out for their goals and their dreams and everything, they stop and say, well, I started here and how would I ever get there? Well, everyone starts together at the same thing as an acquaintance, and we say hello. And so we start to think, hey, I don't have any who, because and I wrote this book called The Power of Who. I would have called it The Power of Friendship, but everyone's got 5,000 people on Facebook and they're best friends. And so it has no meaning anymore. And
Right.
so where you get in life, 12 friends, 3 close, 1 best. And so we've just been taught to try to get to something, to try to find the goal. What do I do in times of trouble? How would I find a mate? How would I do all the things that people are thinking today? And because, whether you had a great job and you lost it, where you sold your company, now you got to go out and date again, and you don't forgotten how to hold hands and kiss and date, to find a new job. It wouldn't matter. The ultimate equalizer is that God gave you specific people to help you. And these people aren't happenstance acquaintances. They were strategically given to you to help that place in life you never even imagined. And so I love your butterfly effect. I mean, I had a guy one time, and he was an assistant coach for a basketball team. He loses his job because his boss cheated on something. And so he's totally dismayed. He's going to be like tied to it. And so a friend of mine meets with him, and he says, so what are you going to do now? Mike. And he said, well, I don't know. I'm working out some people. And he says, well, I got a friend of mine, Bob Beaudine, you got to meet. And he goes, oh, I know Bob Beaudine. He goes, so what's his wife's name? And have you been to his house for a barbecue? And he goes, nah, I don't know that. Well, then you really don't know him, do you? So that's really what people start to do is they make an acquaintance. You met
Right.
me. You met Andy one day. You were in one of his audiences, and I know Andy Andrews. Yeah, I know, but can you go meet with him? And so he says, listen, I'm just going to set this up. So I sit with this young guy, and I say to him, listen, you got to go back and get to your roots. Back I need you to go back into Virginia where you were. I need you to go back and sit around there. And then I need you really to kind of get quiet and then decide what it is that you really want. And I want you to meet with all your friends and tell them what you're doing. Just explain to them and make sure they know, because if you and I are best friends, Andy, and I asked you for help, would you help me?
Absolutely.
Well, why would you deny me the same joy of helping you? See, it never works in reverse. The mindset of people is they hate to ask. And they've been told asking in the South is rude. But the answer is it's ridiculous. The answer is God said, ask, seek, and knock, and He give you. But we don't believe that. So why would we believe the other? So that leaves us with strangers, right? So he goes out, talks to all his friends, does everything, and he comes back to me, goes, oh my gosh. He said, there's an opportunity that's at Radford University, and I could get this job as the athletic director. And he says, I have a friend on the committee, and he said I'd be perfect since I was a coach, and they need this whole thing's around basketball. And he says, but I've never been an AD. Would you spend some time with me? So I give him some tips, and he goes back and wins. He comes back and says, I got to tell you my who story. And I go, what? And he says, I go into the meeting, and this guy who meets me, who's the head of committee, goes, are you Bill Linneberg's son? And he goes, yes. And he goes, so 20 years ago, Bill Linneberg, I was a young guy looking for a job as a coach, and Bill Linneberg was an assistant coach, and the head coach couldn't meet with me, but he took time and did a kind of of kindness with me and spent time with me, and it really changed the whole trajectory of my life then. And so when he walked into the meeting, he said, this guy who's the head of the committee now just pushed me right through. And he said, Bob, he says, 20 years ago, my dad does an act of kindness, a butterfly effect. And 20 years later, it's paid forward to the son. And this guy turns out to be a great. How is it possible that we miss the people that we stood on the shoulders of giants, right? That's what you always talk about, is that you had Zig Ziglar, you have all these people who are friends of mine, right? Tom Ziegler's one of my best friends. And so what's the odds that we haven't even talked about all the friends we really have? But the key would be is that you can't get something if you don't ask. And you don't talk, and you would be so much better if you would do something that people understood. And one of the things people don't understand is we've been taught a thing called, to get goals and dreams, called networking, which is not working, which is faceless. It's handing out business cards to strangers. It's sending out Dear Recruiter letters. I get 250,000 letters a year. Dear sir, to whom it may concern, Dear Recruiter. And Dear Recruiter, that's an oxymoron. I don't know you. You can't call me dear. And so, But at the same time, the answer is the people who we were supposed to do it with were the people who are our friends and our family. And we see them one-dimensionally, don't we? I mean, instead of who-dimensionally, because I don't know who their dad or their brother or their best friend is. And even though they might not be successful at the moment, they could be they are a dentist and they're not in sports. That doesn't mean that their brother isn't the head of ESPN.
That's exactly right. I mean, you have said this much better than I ever say this, but that's, I tell people a lot of times that are looking to fill a position. I say, well, don't just look at the people who already have that position. Look, find the greatest person that you can find and figure out, because you can teach somebody to do almost anything, but the person is the thing. And
oh yeah, I just had a guy who was up for a job for mine for a president of a home shopping network that I was doing. He doesn't get that job, but we connect. And so sometimes, I'm going to present 5 candidates and only one's going to get the job. But I had a real estate group say they were so sad that only one person got the job of the house, and they hated telling the other people who didn't get the house that they, because they're going to be so mad at them. And I say, well, I have 5 or 6 people up for the job. And my favorite thing is telling someone they didn't get the job. And he goes, what? And I go, because I tell them that God has something bigger for them, that if it's not good, it's not done. And there's something so much bigger in the plan. And I'm going to help you now, because now that I know you, I've seen you, I've watched you. I said, that's not the job. You're so much bigger than this. What if we could take you to much higher things, and you're around people who you do a job you love with people you love in a place you love where your family loves you. You get to do it for all the right reasons. And so, that's the key in life sometimes is this guy in the home shopping network wanted this job, but gets another job as the president of all of a sudden J.C. Penney. And he does that job for a while and then calls me one day and says, I got to tell you a who story. And I go, what? And he goes, So my daughter's now graduated. I've been here for 4 or 5 years. I want to go back to New York. I want to run a big company. And he says, no one will respond to me. He says, for the job, I know there's this big job opening for a big footwear company. And he says, I really want this job. And he says, I don't do it. He says, but I read your book and I see that you were talking about look at the job, look at the company, and look at the people. Maybe you knew someone on the board. And so he goes in and he looks at the board, and one of his best friends became this on the board. He makes one call. The guy goes, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're talking. This would be so great. You'd be great. And then separate, they meet the president. He gets the job, and boom, all of a sudden the doors are open. Those are kind of, there's like 2 time zones we live in. One is Chronos, right? Where you wake up, you work out, you go to work, you pay your bills, you do your whole stuff, and you're constantly moving and you're always busy in this. And then there's these Kairos moments that God gives you, that doors are open and put you back on your destiny. And the issue is that that's the crucial piece is, are you connected? And that's why the power of who is the ultimate equalizer, because God's involved. And he can take you places you never had if you stay involved with your friends and family. You're not going to get more who if you didn't take care of the who you got.
I am so glad to be talking to you. Or I'm actually so glad for you to be talking into me. This is one. Some people ask, like, what is what is something you really like about what you do? And I like most of what I do, but I love when I can get a hero of mine on the air and not only speak into my life, but into the lives of my friends. And I appreciate you taking the time. I know this is a busy time of year for you, isn't it, Bob?
It is. I mean, this is basketball time. And so it's really funny is when I got into executive search, my dad started the executive search industry back in 1967 out of McKinsey. And so we did the top 3 jobs all over the country. We had off Chicago, New York, LA, San Francisco, 15 countries in Europe. And then I was running a brand for Carnation, which is now Nestle's. I was the king of spuds. I had frozen French fries. And so I knew more about fries than anybody else. So when we're together, I can tell you exactly the grade and all. But I worked for my dad for like 10 or 12 years doing every possible job. And then one day I say to my dad, listen, I should do what I love plus what I'm really good at. And see, people are thinking that today who are listening. Can I really get out of where I am and move into something a little bit closer to what I love? Because you can't be successful at what you like. You got to love it. And especially in sports, you do. And so he says, what do you mean? I said, well, when I do a search for like a president of a manufacturing company, at the end of the search, I get a tour of the plant. But if I did the head of marketing for the NBA, we get All-Star Weekend. And my dad just thought that was totally humorous. And he said, yeah, you ought to get that. He says, you can't give up your relationships you got and what's hidden. See, people just think they don't have who. And the answer is you do. Everyone was given everything, and miracles hide. So this time, I immediately now have done, my opening search, which was amazing, was a guy who was on our board, which I knew nothing about, who he had found Hank Aaron. He had moved the Milwaukee Braves to the Atlanta Braves. He was a large outside stockholder, but I only knew him because he was my dad's board as a guy who ran insurance that I was doing insurance searches for. And so when I tell people, listen, when I tell you that if you would declare your dream out loud to the people God gave you, something magical that God has prepared is open. But it can't be done until you say it, until you speak it. And so when I did, all of a sudden, he introduced me to this guy, Bill Bartholomew, that was at his board for lunch one day, that he was at his company, and I was there. And he said, and Bill said, can you go out of the room a second? When I came back in, Bill goes, hey, so you didn't really know. And no one had ever done a search in sports before me. Okay, so no one had ever done, all they had ever done really was like Wilson Sporting Goods merchandising people. But there was never, baseball, football, basketball. They are all good old boys telling hey, my coach gets the next coach, another president moved and gives the next. And so today that's not because someone doesn't want to take a chance on the dangers of that.
Right.
So he gave me my first search. Can you imagine? This is how good God is. My opening search is the commissioner of baseball, where I put Bud Selig in.
You're kidding. That's your opening search?
That's my opening search, the largest search. And so I got a chance to interview George W. Bush for the job, Colin Powell. I interviewed the president of Disney, the president of Frito-Lay, presidents of universities. And it was such a big deal that then got me the head of, we created the Arena Football League on a piece of paper. We did Continental Basketball League, and then that opened up all the stuff. So I've done now like 90 coaches. And so this, like today, I'm DVRing something that's really fun. Is I play Scott Drew, who is at Baylor, who won the national championship 2 years ago, into Baylor after a murder on the team. So he was at Valpo, and he came into a job, and the very first day, he's so much you and Scott Drew, Andy. I don't know if you've met him, but you would be best friends. You and his personality, you're so positive. You have a different thought. I love your thoughts that, pursuit without exception, right? There's nothing about this that I'm going to ever do. The very first time that I ever had Scott Drew in a conversation talking about this job, he told me that he thought he could win the national championship there. And so now we're talking when you come on campus, when I get you on campus, that you're going to have to recruit intramural people on the team because no one wants to be on this team. Right. You got to get international. And then, but that never changed over the years. And so, it was never a thought after he started winning Sweet 16. So he plays today. And then I placed his brother, Bryce Drew, at Grand Canyon, and he's in the tournament and for a second time. And so it's so exciting. And so I have like 5 or 6 of my coaches in the tournament that it just makes it so much more fun. But for people today, all these people, one thing is common. As you said, I loved it because you and I say so many things that we're drinking from the same stream from God. See, there's something about it, and that is that you don't live on this planet very long without trouble. And you have to understand trouble as an opportunity in disguise. And when it's really horrific, the trouble, then you've got to get a better understanding that there's still, no matter what, whether you see it yet, if it's not good, God's not done. And there is something hidden in here that all of a sudden can give you growth and freedom. But you got to look for it. You're going to have to focus on it. And so that's really why I shifted and I wrote a book called 2 Chairs.
Do you know, I think 2 Chairs is tied with Boys in the Boat,
right?
of the book that most people have given me. I've been given 7 copies of 2 Chairs, and I've been given 7 copies of Boys in the Boat. I mean, that'll just tell you the power of 2 Chairs, because it's a life-changing book, and people want to share that. And I think there is not a better way to make a lasting friend than to give somebody a book that changes their life.
Well, you're on it. I mean, your books, if you watch some of your videos where I get a chance to really see the crowd, and they show the crowd and you see their face about, it's like life-changing thought going into their minds. And if I talk to all the people who come off this, as you and I have been on the same stage before, but we just never got a chance to meet on that stage. And then I listen to everybody afterwards come up to me and go, oh my gosh, I just wanted to hug Andy. Because there's something about your personal environment. It invisibly is transmitted to you, 30 feet away, that makes them feel affirmed, and it makes them feel that they have it. And so when I wrote 2 Chairs, listen, so I was young. I wanted to get my goals, my dreams. What do I do in times of trouble? How would I do it? And I went to my mom. So I wrote The Power Who through the lens of my dad. I wrote 2 Chairs through the lens of my mom. And I said, so how do I find these, Mom? And she said, those are really good questions, Bob. She goes, I don't have the answer, but I know who does. And so she said, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. These questions are simple, but they're disruptive in this process. And so she said, hey, so these are disruptive in a way that you're going to have to think about them. So she said, I'm going to ask you. And when people come into my office who are in trouble, I say to them, I'm going to ask you these 3 questions. You can't get mad at me. You're going to have to get mad at my mom. And so and so I said, are you ready? And they said, yes. And I said, do you think God knows? And there's people today who are listening to us because 50% of the people we're around are in trouble. They have something going on. It's with their kids. It's with their dad that they got to consider putting in who has dementia. They're going to put him into a hospital. There's somebody's been hit. They don't know it. It's something bad. And so the question really is, does God know your situation? And so the answer is yes. Not only does he know, but he wants you to know he knows. See, the highest priority in a crisis is to get your mind above it. And of course, the higher thought is God. And he doesn't have 6 telephone lines for 7 billion, 8 billion people. He doesn't just work on pandemics and heart attacks and ISIS, etc. He wants to work on you. And so that's a really good thought until you're thinking, does God know your situation? And you're really in trouble. So, he knows. And so now the second question my mom said is it too hard for him to help you? No. And she says, yeah, but it's too hard for you. And so there's the time that the power of who and all the people that you already know, everyone you need to know can get some things done for you. But there are times when trouble is so severe that you have no options. These people can't help, and I need something supernatural to kind of jump in and help me. And so she then says, now listen, does God have a plan for you? And I said, do you think it's a good plan? I said, yes. And she goes, what is it? And I go, I have no idea. And she goes, exactly, 2 chairs. What if, she said, there was a 1% chance that the guy who created the whole world, all the accesses, knows everything going on, would actually come to you and would meet you at your apartment, your house, on beanbags, on 2 rocks, and would talk to you about the situation and give you perspective? Would you want that? Everyone, no matter what, they're atheists, they don't believe, they do believe, they have the situation. So Andy, so I had no idea that I would have. Now God wouldn't let me write this book for 40 years. And mostly to be able to have a body of experience at this stage in my life with kids and grandkids, that I could share something that people would know I know their situation too, right? Because I've been through it. And so I had no idea in June that my grandson, Bo, who was named Beau after Beaudine, my grandson would drown in a pool at 13 months old. And so my son-in-law got him out of the pool and resuscitated him. So we had 7 days in the ICU. And so on day 1, you're in an abyss. You have nowhere to turn. And so on day 2, we decided we'd lock arms. Now, my life quote, Tom Ziegler and I have kind of like same kind of life quotes. I bet you do too. My life quote, who would have ever picked this, was in John 16:33, in this world, you're going to have trouble. Be of good cheer. And my wife's quote was Philippians 4:6-8, that be anxious for nothing. Just make your request known to God, and the peace of God that surpasses understanding. So there has to be something in horrific aspects of something that could surpass it and get you through something so you could still hear God as you go. And so the reason John 16 works for me is that how could you have trouble and be of good cheer? Well, you'd have to know something. And see, the difference in a transformational life and a transactional one is knowing. It's all in the knowing. If I'm going to stick in this thing and I'm going to pursue it, then I got to understand something that is so overwhelming that I have on my side. And if God's for you, who can be against you? And so on day 2, we locked arms as a family, and we just prayed, and we just said, hey, listen, we're hoping he wakes up. We're trusting you, and we're going to yield. We're going to surrender. And then one of us, and something happened. I hope it doesn't have you. I hope no one who's listening has to have all surpassing peace enter the room. But when it did, everything changed. It's like he reformatted our brain to go through the 7 days. And so all of a sudden, everything was light. And we started like praying for people on the ICU. We started doing things. And then what happened is on day 8, okay, and it's really, let me even go back. When we first named him Bo Burns, and that's my son-in-law's last name, Burns, I thought it was a good idea that his middle name should be Dean, so it could be Beaudine Burns. And and of course, he didn't like that idea. And he wanted it to be an uncle that he liked, Brocious. And I thought, Bo Bro? I mean,
Oh, bro.
and I said, no, he's a big lineman, a very successful guy in architecture, and he creates, big stadiums. And I said, okay. And so on day 1 in the hospital, my daughter has a dream of seeing Bo in heaven, clearly playing in a stream. On day 7, Andy, we look up what Bo Brocious Burns means, and it means beautiful eternal stream. So hold it a second. On day 8, Bo gives his heart to a 4-month-old who has never been home from the hospital and is now home and is probably 13 months old. He gave his liver to a boy that was on our floor that Cheryl and I prayed for, okay, on that floor, not knowing that we're praying and he's going to get my grandson's liver. And he gave his 2 kidneys, 2 little peanuts, to a 42-year-old woman who didn't have long to live, but she can totally live perfect. And these little kidneys, she doesn't need dialysis. And my daughter's going to get to meet all of them. In the people who are listening today, I can tell you that God walks through all these situations with you. And it's so overwhelming. But if your situation's not good, it's not done. You have to look at the bigger picture. You have to do this. I mean, I have at least 5 other miracles that happened already, and our best one's coming today in a thing that I'll be able to tell in the future that's so overwhelmingly strong that all of a sudden does it. But one of the things that I just found is this. Wouldn't it be logical that you would want to talk to God in the morning before you start your day? That you would tell him all your stuff. You'd make this exchange. I'd sit and I'd start out in gratitude with him and praise him. I would all of a sudden say, hey, I'm sorry for the stuff that I've just messed up on, which is, I'm anxious for this. I'm worried about this. I don't know why I gave you this problem and now I've taken it back. And then I'd say, here's what I really need for my day. And I surrender. I'm going to yield it all to you. Right. And then I gotta shift, right? There's an exchange. During this time that you give all this stuff, then what God gives you is peace and joy and insight and wisdom and power and favor for your day ahead. I mean, wouldn't it be logical if you had a meeting? What if God had some person he wanted you to meet at 9? Because that's what he normally says to me. And he says, you got anything else you want to review? And I go, no. And he says, well, I got 4 things for you. And he says, are you available? And I go, sure. And he goes, it'll be inconvenient, Bob. But if you take care of these things, I'm going to take care of some of the others. And you know what's funny? Just like you said on this butterfly effect, I take care of one of the things for one of these people, not knowing that this has an impact on my kids or someone else's job or something else we did. You have so painted a picture that has an exponential global effect on the world that no one even saw. And it was always there, hidden in plain sight. And the answer is all it needed for you to do is what? Take action. Just move. Just go and do that part. And you can't do that if I'm worried. So, oh my gosh, this happened with Bo and this happened with my daughter and this happened to this. And then I lost sight of Andy in front of me. And the answer today is, listen, go out today and expect and receive the blessing. That's what John Gordon would do one time. He used to always tell me is that he's created this whole acronym that's so fantastic. He's another unbelievable guy like you. I mean, it's just like you can't believe it.
Yeah, well, you are unbelievable too. And I mean, God has given you an ability to communicate that is instantly identifiable. I look at you and listen to you, and I think about the prayer that I pray every day, and I feel like I'm looking at the person that has that. And here's what I pray every day, Bob. I pray, God, help me to understand things you want your people to understand, that if they did understand, they'd live the lives you want them to live, which means they'd have a relationship with you, and they wouldn't have to go to the government or to Oprah or even to me. They'd go to you, and give me simple ways to explain complicated things that are confusing people.
Yeah.
And that's what you have done for us today.
Well, I mean, all the ultimate equalizer is God, okay? Because there's no bureaucracy. We don't have to go through anybody. You don't have to go through a pastor, a rabbi, a priest, or anybody doing it. He'll meet you himself. And I mean, I have people all the time. They say, "Hey, so Bob, what is God going to say to me at my 2 chairs?" And I go, "I didn't write 3 chairs. I don't get to go. This is going to have to be you." He wants, we have a head knowledge, don't we, about some facets of God, and we've been in pew 3. We think of God. I mean, I grew up and a little bit like, as long as I'm done with church, I can watch in 20 minutes and watch the Chicago Bears, and I'm not gonna read the Bible. I mean, that's why we pay Father Mulcahy, and then the issue is my mom called a line to that, and she said that head knowledge doesn't work. Even when you get it into your heart, that is one thing. But everyone who's listening to you today is thinking to themselves, could I actually pull up a chair in the morning first thing? So I don't want to, if God said, if you seek him first, all these other things that you want are added to you. Now, we don't need things in heaven. We need them here. And so he's created a kingdom. And so, we don't own anything anymore. He does it. He's got us. It's a commonwealth. He's done so many fantastic things. But here's this. Wouldn't it be good if he talked to you? So you get 1 minute to talk. He gets 4. If you want 2, he gets 8, because he's got some things to tell you. And the first one is, he ain't mad at you. He's not mad. He made you. He made no mistakes. He's got a plan for you. It's really good. It's prosperous. It has a future and a hope. And he calls you friend. And if once we do that, can you imagine how good we can walk out? So now my goal with college coaches is to get them to add an empty chair on their bench. Okay. And it's closest to, in basketball, it'll be closest to the thing. And there's an empty chair there so that every player on the team can see that if this gets really tight, we can lay down the trouble and go do what we're supposed to do at the highest tier. And the coach isn't going to be mad at some referee. He's not going to do it. And then we're going to get football coaches to do it. And then we're going to open this up. And all of a sudden, we're able to think thoughts that, and I have an empty chair. If you go to my 2 chairs at my house, one says 2 chairs, the other with the little pillow, the other says reserved. and Tom Ziegler's favorite thing is Tom Ziegler's first time he said, he sat down at 2 chairs. He said, "Good morning." And he said, and then the guy asked him, "What else did you, what next?" And he says, I told God, Bob told me to come. And he said, you can't like tell God, you can't help Bob and not help me. And he says, so if you want, what is it that you'd like to say to me? Because if you're real, you got to reveal. And he said, and he heard God clearly saying, "Hey, Tom, you're in my seat." Tom jumps up and goes and sits in the other seat. And he goes, "Did you really say that to me?" And he says, "Of course." He says, "Is that real enough for you?" And so everything shifted in Tom's life after that, right? His mom had died, his dad has died, and now his Ziglar Inc. has just gone this way. When you start to think, how could I follow a person like Zig Ziglar? I'm sure your kids and your grandkids are saying, how could I do what Andy did? And what you're telling them all the time is, listen, you do one thing better than anyone in the world. God created you so amazing. And I'm taking everything that I have as a dad, as a grandpa, and I'm doing what the Jewish faith does every night. I love you. I'm laying my hands on you and telling you, I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm giving you the Father's blessing. And now let's see what happens in their life, right? They walk right into their calling. They start doing great and mighty things, and everything shifts. And so I'm the proudest to be on a show with you, because you do actionable tools that help people have a happier, joyful, more positive life. And just like you said, can happy people, are they more successful? Yes, they are. And why? Because who wants to be around the mopey people? The answer is,
Right.
and that's what a lot of Christians are to a degree. They're mopey. And the answer is they don't need to be.
Man, this is great. You know, talking about Tom and the butterfly effect, do you know that Tom's dad is the reason that is a book?
No.
Because I had developed that story for the Air Force in response to a question that they asked me, and I developed that story, and I was at a thing that Bill and Gloria Gaither had, and I was speaking at this, and my wife was sitting on the first row, and every time I would glance at her, she would go, and I had no idea what she was doing, and I'm trying to pay attention, but every now and then finally we get through, and I immediately down with her, and I said, what are you doing this for? And she said, look at the end of the row. And I looked down there, and it was Zig and Jean. And I almost fainted. I said, thank God I didn't know that he was listening to me. And so, but then when I went to talk to him, he's talking, and one of the things he says to me, he says, I love that thing you do there with the butterfly effect, and I think it really should be a book.
And there it began. All he
Yeah.
did was seed you. And so I became so he lived like 2 streets from me. And he'd always out be walking, etc. Bob, top of the morning, Bob. Okay. And he'd always be doing something nice. And I'd go on Sundays. I wouldn't go over to sometimes to listen to Jack Graham do his talk. I would go in just to listen to Zig do his newcomers. Because it's like, dang, I can watch a $40,000 talk for free on every Sunday and get him. We became great friends. And so I'm one time in Tom Thumb's store. Okay. And there's the little redhead. And so Jean's over there, and she's praying for a woman in aisle number 3. And I'm coming down. Now, I do all the talks for Tom. I do a talk on every time he does Ziegler Legacy. He's done like 27 or 8 of them. I missed one. And so I'm coming down the aisle, and there she is. And I pause because I'm going to wait while she does it. Then all of a sudden and she looks up and sees me. Bob, come over here. Okay, I want you to meet Eleanor. Now we're praying for her, Bob. He says, this is the situation. And she looks at him and she goes, when Bob prays for you, Eleanor, and I agree, it's going to have this unbelievable effect. So she's building the faith expectation in her. She says, if 2 people agree, it's going to be one thing. But when we do it as 3, that cord can't be broken. Okay. And so we pray. I thought the woman was going to jump when all of a sudden we grabbed hands. Her whole body just went through. And so Jean Ziegler had this thought, and I tell it to people all the time. What's the most important thing to you, Mrs. Ziegler? And she says, God, family, and the person right in front of you. And so when I heard that, there was nothing, it's the way because at such a young age, I went to a Zig Ziglar event, and I told people, I said, so my favorite thing in a speech when I'm done is to sit afterwards and meet everybody and then have my moment, this Kairos moment that I can change someone in 5 minutes. I'm writing a new book called 5 Minutes or Less, that everything great happens to you in 5 minutes. Everything bad happens in 5 minutes. And you know what that means? Well, that means that time isn't our enemy, but timing's our best friend. And you and I can change them. And if we got everyone to think that this opportunity of the other person right in front of them, we could really do some damage to the enemy's kingdom. And that's my whole point every day to people. Listen, the enemy talks to you every day and you're okay with it. But if all of a sudden you hear one word from God, we're schizophrenic. This is the craziest thing I've ever heard. I said, the guy has some things to tell you about your life and change it drastically in huge success if you just listen to him. We got to listen, stop talking, start to listen, and everything changes.
That's just brilliant. Buddy, how can I appreciate so much you taking the time to do this. How can we How can we help you?
So all around the country, my number one goal is that, I never thought, I was an executive recruiter. And so I never thought I remember back one day that I had a meeting with the very first time I'm with my dad in Search in New York. He said, I want you to meet a client of ours, and it's Norman Vincent Peale. And so we were doing the publisher of Guidepost magazine. And so we go in, they're sitting there doing all this stuff and they're talking. It's like my dad's like Ronald Reagan. He's got this great voice of Norman. And then Norman flipped his chair and looked at me and goes, so Bob, I'm 28 years old. And he says, you're a speaker. And I go, I've never done any speaking. And he goes, well, I'm not talking rhetorically. He says, I just heard that you're a speaker. And I'm just sharing it with you. And I go, wow. And I said, and he goes, do you want the tip? And I said, yes, sir. And he goes, no notes. He says, so when I watched you the last night, I watched for an hour and 20 minutes or something, watch you give a talk, and you had no notes. You just were sharing your heart. And it could have been, it should be a talk that people hear all over the world constantly because you spoke directly into their soul. You were touching heartstrings that people were thinking. You laid your hand on a man's chest and told him so many things as you're holding his chest. And when they walked away, they looked at this man and he just had tears coming down his face because you genuinely care. He said to me, Bob, as you talk to people, you got to listen to the Holy Spirit. Listen to what God says to you, because you have so many stories that you're going to be able to tell. He's going to flip them. You're never going to know which way you go. And he says, if you'll just listen, then he'll tell you things about each person as you're with them. You can hug them. You can do something that's crazy. That's been the most thing. So, I've never had a speaker's bureau. I've never had any, the Power Who's never really had any help. Every time anyone's ever bought my book or done it, it's only because God whispered it to somebody to send you the book, and we do it. So I've kind of just, I never really thought I was going to be an author. In fact, for a while, I said, gee, I can't write a memo. My dad told me on his deathbed I was going to write books. I said, I can write a memo. And then finally one day God looked at me and goes, hey, so listen, you're an author. I did this with you. I wrote this. You and we're going to do some things. So the more times I want people just to, once it's giving 2 chairs to someone is like the life-changing break for them. And so when you have someone who just doesn't know what they're doing, where they're going, they got hard times, they're their mom's in hospice, or you have some son who doesn't know how to get a job and he's thinking he's going to have to do cold calls and mass emails and send out Dear Recruiter letters. Give him the Power of Who. And then the answer is somewhere along, the greatest thing in the world is I'm just going to be on some stage with you. And you and I are going to just do sage advice for kids.
Well, I'll tell you, that's my new bucket list goal there, is to hang with you. I got to tell you one story.
I love it. Please.
And this is, I got to meet Norman Vincent Peale one time, and it was just very briefly. It was just a shake hands and hi, it's nice to meet you. Not like you had, but I watched him do something with an audience that I have never forgotten. I was a young speaker and probably a lot cockier than I should have been. And he goes out, and he was very old, and
right.
And he goes out, and I've heard about this legend, and I've read his books, and now I've met him for the first time. And my thought, I'm ashamed to admit this, but my thought at the moment is, wow, he is like creaky. He is like really creaky.
Yeah.
And so they introduced him, and he goes out with a stack of 3x5 note cards. And of course, I think it's his notes. And so he goes out, they introduce him, standing ovation when he comes out.
Yeah.
And And then he settles his note cards on the thing, and he's taking a while. And I'm thinking, man, this is getting away from him. And so he says, I'd like to talk to you today. And one point I would like to make that you, and he's flipping through his cards. And he says, a point that I would like to make, because there's something that, and he's looking, and I'm off stage, and I'm going, oh man. And
Trouble.
he says, there's something that everyone needs to be as effective as they would need to be to communicate. And then suddenly his cards go on the floor.
Right.
And I literally turned around. I couldn't bear to watch. And then I turned back around, and he's picking up several of them, and then they're still around. And he says, there's one thing that everyone needs to be as effective as you could be: empathy. And I went, oh my gosh. I mean, then of course he was
Crushing
strong, unbelievable, the rest, but he totally got me. He got everybody, but I have never forgotten that.
Well,
I mean, just from this creaky person to empathy.
What I loved is yesterday is that you weren't going to tell them number 3. And you wait, and you got me, and I'm waiting. Oh my gosh, I gotta wait for number 3. What the heck? I'm not getting up until you tell me number 3. My wife has already come into the room. Do not stop and do not pass go. You're not collecting $200 until I hear number 3. And so it's the same thought. I went to Billy Graham for his last time he's in Dallas. And so he's got Parkinson's. He's got this thing. He comes in the stadium. I turned. We got great seats. It's sold out. I had my mom with me, and I said to Mom, we're watching him. I go, it's the same group. It's the same people. It's the same talk. It's the same music. It's the same everything. And so she goes, yeah. And she goes, and I go, and I'm thinking to myself arrogantly, like, hey, so like I could give a talk, in my opinion, that could be something that could be good. And she goes, so my mom goes, so listen, and she goes, I'm going to tell you something at the end, but I want you to watch. And so I said, okay. And so finally we come to the end. I said to Mom, I said, everyone here's trying to just see Billy Graham at the last time. There's not anybody here who's not saved. I mean, so they're all here just to get a gander at this legend. And so I'm looking and I'm watching this thing. And then all of a sudden he uses a machine to kind of slowly get up, and he stands and he goes, so we're at that moment. He says, I used to get really excited. I used to get animated. I used to do this. He says, I don't think, having talked to God today, I don't think I have to do that. And he says, so come on down. That's all he said. And thousands and thousands and thousands of people started pouring in to go down to get onto the field to all of a sudden get in to give their life to Christ. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And so I said to my mom, what is it that you were saying? She goes, it's not about the speech. It's about the anointing. And she goes, he's paid the price for that. And I looked and said, as you're saying empathy, first off, you got me. I'm sitting here saying, what am I saying? What did that just come out of your mouth? He was like, and he had said during his talk, hey, listen to me, don't make the mistake of not giving your life. You could die on the way out. I took my mom early because there's 8,000 people going down to the floor. And so I'm taking my mom out and I'm walking her out. And dang, a person dies on the corridor as we're going out. And I looked over and everyone stopped and everyone looked around this person. They're bagging the person and everyone looked at each other and they go, well, I hope he gave his life to Christ. I hope he did that first. And because, listen, it's transformational life, transactional life. It's all in the knowing. And so that the one scene at the end of the Bible where all of a sudden God says there's a lot of people outside and they said they did all this stuff for me. They sat in pew 3, they did all these talk. And his line was, yeah, but I don't know them. And so God said to me, get people to 2 chairs and we'll get to know each other. He says, we'll seal that deal. Your job is to get them to the 2 chairs. That's it. I'll take over from here. I'm really good at this. And so I'm so excited because your books, your things that you have written have gotten people to give a life and change their life of their home, their kids, their grandkids, everybody around it. You make my life better. All my life, I take little stuff and stories from yours and little stuff and stories from people's lives. I screamed out one time at Tom Ziglar's meeting, I'm Zig Ziglar. And everyone was like, what? And I go, well, I'm a part of each person. I can say, I'm Andy Andrews because he's got a part in my heart and it's taken place. And once someone takes a place in your heart, it never leaves.
Buddy, thank you for being with us, and to the listening and viewing audience. I think we have our marching orders here. Within the week, make sure that you have 2 chairs, but when you order 2, so you can give one away. Now, I don't need another one. All right, I've got a bunch, but I've given away those 2. But I've got my one. And so that's our marching orders for the week. Bob, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
No, I'm just so honored. And first off, I feel such a gift because I've always been a friend of yours because I read books and they become my friends. And now I got a chance to actually spend time with you. And it was more reaffirmed that God had already pre-planned this before the foundation of the world, that we'd get an opportunity.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll talk
Blessings
soon.
on you. Thanks.
I'm Andy Andrews, the professional noticer, harnessing common sense and wisdom to plow through challenges all the way to an answer for you. And I think that'll do it for this week. Get us out of here, Matthew. So, ladies and gentlemen, and to the boys and girls who aspire to become ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of another episode of The Professional Noticer. In a world where common sense has become a superpower, I am harnessing that tiny bit of mental energy I have for you, seeking wisdom, making observations, and endeavoring to answer tough questions in a way that will empower your family and your business. I'm Andy Andrews. Until next week, goodbye. This episode of The Professional Noticer was produced by Matt Limpert. The Noticer theme written and performed by Sugarcane Jane. Round 2-its for the cast and crew provided by Twinkle and Smoke of Beverly Hills. Additional financial consideration provided by politicallycorrectsuperheroes.com. Are you offended by the words man and woman? Do the terms male and female make you angry? If so, consider donating to our cause. Here at politicallycorrectsuperheroes.com, we are lobbying the entertainment industry in every way we can to eliminate those vile words from movies and comic books. Our attorneys at politicallycorrectsuperheroes.com tell us it's not enough just to replace those words. No, retitling superheroes as Spider-Person, Bat-Person, or Wonder-Person doesn't go nearly far enough. PoliticallyCorrectSuperheroes.com is fighting to eliminate all labels. In a brighter world, our superheroes will be simply named Iron, Spider, Super, and Bat. They'll be joined in fighting crime by Aqua, Cat, Ant, and Invisible. If you have thought this through and truly believe in this ideal, PoliticallyCorrectSuperheroes.com would appreciate your support. Please just slip a $10 bill into a plain white envelope and address it to Andy Andrews, Wisdom Harbor Studios, Orange Beach, Alabama 36561. That's only $10 for a better world. politicallycorrectsuperheroes.com.